Well, good afternoon to you. 306 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Matt Rosendale joins us, the congressman from Montana, at 3:30. We're going to talk about the big fight Congress is having with Joe Biden over military spending. Biden looking to abort more children rather than take care of our military. Republicans hoping to reverse that awful decision. Sarah Bedford will be with us at 4:30 today from the Washington Examiner to react to what is happening in Iowa today. A showdown in Des Moines as Republican candidate after Republican candidate seems to be going down in flames. In conversations with Tucker Carlson, the details on that ahead. And Kurt Schlichter is here at 5:30 today. We'll take a closer look at this decision to send troops to Ukraine, call up the reserves by the Biden administration, and Biden's weird penchant for sniffing children on display again this week. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Do you feel like the presidential candidates adequately, I'm talking about the Republicans, forget Joe Biden. He can't adequately speak to anybody's issues. But do you think that the Republican presidential candidates, no matter who they are, in any way adequately speak to the things that you care about or that your family cares about? Because the display we're seeing today out of Des Moines, Iowa, is that so far, almost none of these candidates even know what you're interested in, and certainly seem to be obsessed with things that don't really have much to do with improving your lives. And it's a real tragedy. It really is that that's the case. But boy, I just, there is just so much happening here. So what you have going on in Des Moines, Iowa is called the FAMiLY Leadership Summit. The FAMiLY Leadership Summit. It is run by a prominent Iowan called Bob Vanderplaat, who stands up there today, and they're running a presidential candidate forum. And the man who's doing all the moderation today is the fired Fox News host Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is doing all the moderation today, and it's not even with all of the candidates together. It's a one-on-one candidate forum. So each person is coming in one by one to sit down with Tucker, and I didn't get the exact timing, but it looks like 20 or 30 minutes a person. They have nowhere to go. They can't escape. They have to stay on stage, and they have to answer questions from Tucker. Now, Tucker is, as he pointed out at the beginning of the morning and throughout today, he's being very polite, but he's being forceful. If he feels like the candidates aren't answering the questions, he keeps doubling down and saying, wait a second, take me back, help me understand this. And he's being polite and respectful of these guys. And some of them are becoming furious. You can tell in their mannerisms that they're even being asked some of these questions, or that they're being asked to be more specific, that they can't just dodge the question. And I don't know about you, but it's certainly true in my case, and true in the case of a lot of people that I know, a lot of conservatives that I know. We as a people have become more attuned to when we are being lied to, and when Republicans, sorry, not just Republicans, but politicians broadly, but specifically Republicans, as we talk about this Republican primary, aren't telling you the truth or are skipping past an answer they really should be giving, right? We can all smell it. We can all see it. And as Tucker laid out this morning in a conversation with Bob Vanderplaat, the idea here is that he needs to test these guys for their integrity. That's the thing he's really looking for their integrity. The politicians will often try and overwhelm you with a bunch of words and statements to give you the appearance that they're addressing something with aggression. But in the end, you sort of get lost in what they're saying, and that's by design. Who's being sincere? Who actually has their finger on the pulse of what the American people care about? Who's going to serve the American people well as president of the United States? And who's going to give it to us straight? You can join me today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I want to start in order. I'm going to go in chronological order here today. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott begins. And there's quite a bit of conversation today about Ukraine. And that's for obvious reasons, because overnight, Joe Biden, rather quietly, they posted this on the White House website, but there was not a lot of fanfare about this, decided to call up 3,000 reserve troops nationwide to send them into Europe, into Eastern Europe, to join the conflict against Russia, to support the Ukrainian conflict against Russia. 3,000 reserve troops, including 450 members of the individual ready reserve. These are people who previously served an active duty who could be called up again subsequent to their service for a time. So we don't have apparently enough active duty troops to cycle them in. And so instead what's happening here is reserve troops are now being called up to go off to be deployed to the front lines there, or just behind the front lines, I guess, in Europe, in Ukraine. This is a huge deal. The Biden administration is escalating the American military response now. And so, obviously, it is one of the critical questions. How does this end? What should this look like? What are our key interests there? Can you articulate what victory looks like? What is the priority? And does it include stopping the bloodshed? So let me play some of this for you. This is Tim Scott today talking about Joe Biden's failures when it comes to Ukraine. Here he is.
I think one of the failures of President Biden has been his inability to articulate America's national vital interest in the conflict or the genocide in Ukraine. America's national vital interest is degrading the Russian military. When we degrade the Russian military, we make sure that our home front is safer.
Well, is the Russian military a threat to our home front, even in the current state that it's in? At what point is it no longer a threat to our home front? Because that's Tim Scott's declaration, is that we need to degrade the Russian military until it is no longer a threat to our home front. Now, I don't really know how that solves the nuke problem, because the Russians have the most nukes on the planet, and those continue to be a threat to our home front, regardless of how much we, quote, degrade the Russian military. Here is Tim Scott. He's asked a little bit by Tucker, why not force a peace in this conflict?
Why not force a peace?
How would you do that?
Well, you could tell Ukraine, and they are a client state of the United States, without American backing, there's kind of no Ukraine. We're literally paying the salaries of their bureaucrats. We want you to sit down, as they tried to do, but were stopped by our government, and stop this war.
Yeah.
And reach a peace as one does, where both sides, concede some of their interests. Like, why wouldn't that be in our interest to do that?
I think the faster we get to peace, the better off we are. What we don't want to do, from my perspective, is allow ourselves to ask for a premature peace that cannot be achieved as the alliances continue to come together. To the extent that we can find our path out of this situation, the better off we are.
What is that answer? That doesn't tell us anything, does it? I mean, it's a lot of words, but it doesn't give us specifics. He said that we shouldn't try and negotiate a premature peace. But the Biden administration has had many opportunities. They have the controlling stake in this entire conflict. Don't you realize? The Russians on one side, the Americans on the other. That's the truth, because we are financing, enabling, arming, training this war in Ukraine. And so to the extent that we have a bargaining position, which we do, given the immense treasure we've poured into the conflict, the immense stockpiles of weapons we've poured into the conflict, at our own expense, at the expense of our own security. Do we have a stake? Absolutely. So what do we do with that power that we have over Zelensky, or we should? We say, okay, get together. You have to. Hell or high water. You have to have these conversations about what can be done to resolve this. But every time that's come up, the Biden administration said, nope. The position is Russia needs to fully leave Ukraine, and in fact, it needs to go as far as we need to get Crimea back for the Ukrainians. And at one point, Joe Biden was saying, for God's sake, man, Putin needs to go. With all these like lunatic positions that don't actually end the human suffering, but they do accelerate it. Tucker asks about the decision to send cluster bombs. Notice that Tim Scott doesn't answer the question. He tries to say, well, it's a moot point because it's already occurred, therefore I don't have to address it.
Where are you on the matter of sending cluster bombs to the Ukrainian military?
Well, if I was president of the United States, we wouldn't have to. Here's what you saw.
But now that we have, what do you think of it?
Well, I mean, I think they're there. So here's what I would suggest.
That's not an answer.
I don't think they're there yet. Do you think that we should send them?
I think that the mistake is when you have President Biden saying to the world that here are a host of weapons that we no longer have the ammunition to supply. You have a request coming from Ukraine saying we need more of the weapons that you say you don't have to provide. as opposed to keeping top secret information in your closet, you go to the front pages of every news station, you go to the screens, and President Biden says to the world, we don't have the ammunition. And so what you see from Ukraine is they say send the cluster bombs over. Under my administration, we would have the resources and a defense industrial complex that provides the weapons that we need and our Western allies need. We wouldn't be in this position at all.
Do you think he should send them?
I wouldn't have to. He already has agreed to do so.
I wouldn't have to. What is that answer? I mean, how hard is it just to answer the question? No, I don't. No, I don't. You could even say, if I were president, this would have never occurred. But as it stands today, no, he should not be sending them. But no, instead we get an opaque answer, not a clear one. Tucker asks also about the American priorities here. Remember, throughout this, there has been the obvious point, which is, Joe Biden seems a lot more interested in securing Ukraine's border than ours. A lot more interested. In fact, he has no interest in securing our border, despite whatever lip service they pay to it. If he did, he wouldn't have assigned Kamala Harris to the crisis. If you cared about something, you wouldn't put Kamala Harris in charge of it. You do that to insult the American people. That's why you do that. Tim Scott asked about this by Tucker today.
Well, so here's, I'm just interested because all measures are relative. So Russia's bad, Russia's a threat, Putin's evil, got it. But the total body count from Russia in the United States is right around 0. Like, I don't know anyone who's been killed by Russia. I know people personally who've been killed by Mexico. The government of Mexico allows fentanyl to be made in its country and to come over our border.
Yes.
And remittances from Mexico are a huge part of their economy. The Mexican government is party to the murder of hundreds of thousands of Americans. So why is Mexico less of a threat than Russia?
Well, two things. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Okay, but
Yeah, and frankly, here's
no Americans killed by Russia,
Yep.
hundreds of thousands killed by Mexico, but Mexico's our ally and Russia's our enemy. How does that work?
Well, I'm not going to pretend like the legislation I have sponsored and I would sign as President of the United States freezes the assets of the Mexican cartels, targets the Mexican cartels, and hopefully eliminates the flow of fentanyl.
But I think what you're hearing here is Tucker saying that's kid gloves, what you're talking about, just going after the cartels. You have to force the Mexican government to take this seriously, or else there are consequences for them.
I do agree with you that 70,000 Americans losing their lives on an annual basis is an existential threat to America that we can solve. We don't have to choose. The good news is
Would you be willing to say to the Mexican government, your economy runs on factories right over the border, car plants, for example, but many other manufacturing plants, and we're just going to slap tariffs on that and tank your economy, like tomorrow, unless you stop.
By the way, remember, this is what Trump did. Trump triangulated a trade war threat in order to get Mexico to begin to enforce its own southern border. The Mexican government did not start doing that until Trump threatened them with tariffs. And they said, well, wait a second. You can't threaten our economy. We'll stop some of the inflow.
Allowing poison to come into our country. Like, why not do that?
I say we use every tool available to stop fentanyl from coming across our border. No exceptions.
Okay, all right. So did that sound resolved to you? Did that sound like, like it was like, all right, you're totally right. I don't know. It was kind of a catch-all answer at the end. He says, oh, we'll use every tool available, and that's good to hear. To stop fentanyl, no questions. He says, okay, all right, that's fine. But it's just, why does this have to be like pulling teeth? I guess that's the question. Why does this have to be so difficult? Why do people need to be shoved in the direction of the voters, of like normal opinions on these subjects? So there's Tim Scott today. Now, I should also point out that Scott was clearly, he went first, so the other candidates got an opportunity to see what this looked like. So in that sense, good for Tim Scott going first, just diving right in, not knowing what it was actually going to look like. And there you go. And there were moments where Scott was clearly uncomfortable with having to navigate these questions. And they had two high top chairs on the stage where you could sit, and Tucker stayed in his position the whole time. But in Tim Scott's case, he's the only candidate who's done this so far that I'm aware of, right? I don't think any of the other candidates have done this. Corey, you were watching some of this today. I don't think any of the other candidates did this. Scott would stand up and walk away from the chairs and then directly address the crowd, hundreds of pastors in the crowd. He would directly address them and then give some sort of a stump speech that would stray very far afield from the question he was asked in the first place, kind of like a survival technique. But to the viewer at home, to the people who are listening to this, but certainly if you could see it on stage, it looked like, what are you scared of, man? Just sit down. You can handle this. Tim Scott, smart guy, likable guy, capable guy, good speaker. He's got it all. He can do it. Just do it. Just do it. But he was ducking and covering at times today. Let me add one other thing here, and it's a compliment to Tim Scott, all these candidates. The left would never do this. You would never see a forum composed of Democrats being asked sincere questions, even from somebody who agrees with their direction as a party, as awful as that direction is, who agrees with their direction of a party, and then challenge them in the areas in which they disagree. Democrats would never allow this kind of forum to occur. Meanwhile, Republican candidates, I'll give them credit here. They are doing this. They are subjecting themselves to this. And I think it's better. I think it's better for America that the people who want to lead this country be subjected to tougher scrutiny. So I'm glad this is happening today. I've got a lot more of these coming up. I'll take some of your calls in just a moment. Okay, let's take some calls. We've got Mark calling in from Virginia Beach. That's line one. Mark, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. How are you?
I'm great, sir. What's on your mind?
Well, I think Tucker Carlson is on the right track. Americans need to hear their politicians question hard for real answers, not snowball bluff answers that they think we want to hear.
Yes.
Talking point. I heard, what's his name, Vaswamy. I read his article today.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yes, sir. If he's going to shut down, if he can, I know he's going to take Congress to do it, but if he can shut down some of the useless departments in the government, he'd save us a ton of money and a ton of aggravation.
100%. He's a really talented candidate. We've been talking to him for years, and he will be questioned by Tucker Carlson later today. If we get any clips from that, we'll be sharing it.
He's going to be afraid to answer the question.
No, he won't. I'm with you, Mark. I think that Vivek may have the easiest run today because he has answers to these questions and doesn't mind giving them. Some of these other politicians very nervous today, trying to navigate this, walking through a minefield. I mean, look, if you were to agree to this in the first place, as they all did, you'd think they would come ready. It's not like they don't have game tape to look at. Tucker's only been on television for a million years. You know, it's not. What is the guy interested in? What is he going to ask about? Some obvious stuff. And yet they came unprepared. If you are unprepared for a candidate forum with a television host, what makes you think you're prepared to be president of the United States? We're going to chat in a moment with Matt Rosendale, the congressman from Montana, as Joe Biden looking to abort more children and using the military to do it. There's a real fight in Congress over this now. Matt Rosendale gives us the update. Good afternoon to you. It's 3:35 here on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Where we're making sense of the news on yet another busy news day. It's a Friday. Great to have you with us. Coming up, Sarah Bedford joins us at 4:30 with reaction to this family leadership summit taking place in Des Moines, Iowa today. Republican presidential candidates, let's be honest, not faring well in the face of some great questions today from our buddy Tucker Carlson. We'll give you more of that audio coming up. And Kurt Schlichter is here at 5:30. We're going to talk about Biden sniffing children and skipping NATO conferences. Speaking of guys who shouldn't be president. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Joe Biden escalating the U.S. military response to the Ukraine war overnight. He authorized the activation of 3,000 reserve troops and not to include more than 450 of which would come from the individual ready reserve. That is, guys who were active duty, got out, but have contracts to possibly be called back up again within the next 2 or so years. And 450 such people are now being activated to be sent to Europe for our conflict with Russia. For more on this and everything else going on with the military right now at the hands of the Biden administration, I want to bring in Congressman Matt Rosendale. He represents Montana's 2nd Congressional District and joins us now. Congressman, good to talk to you, sir.
Vince, good to be on with you.
How much advance notice was Congress given that thousands of reserve troops were being called up to go to Europe?
Zero. We started getting text information last night while we were coming off of the floor, so like at midnight. That's when I first started getting information that there was going to be additional troops, reservists sent over to Europe to help. Exactly what are they going to do? They're going to help demonstrate that NATO is a unified force. I'm very concerned, Vince, as you know, have been talking about this since February 23rd of 22, when Russia first invaded Ukraine. Actually, yes. The record will reflect that I started talking about it about a month before that. We could see what was on the horizon, and I don't like to see an expansion of this conflict. We passed the NDAA, the National Defense Act, Authorization Act, this morning, after we had a great process this week.
Yes.
But one of the amendments that we tried to place on there was to simply require the administration to develop and deliver a plan or a mission statement on what in the world they're trying to accomplish in Ukraine. And we could not even get the amendment placed on the National Defense Authorization Act to submit a plan to us, not on the back of a napkin, not on the back of an 8.5 by 11, a plan, a mission statement. Tell us what their goals are. We could not even get that inserted into the National Defense Act, and that is a problem.
Well, how is he allowed to do this? So Congress not consulted, no authorization for use of military force. He's just calling up thousands upon thousands of troops and sending them into Europe now. And you don't know why? He hasn't told you?
No, he has not. And as long as, here's my understanding. I don't serve on HASC. I don't serve on Homeland Security. But it's my understanding that as long as they are not having these troops engage in any active conflict, then he's able to do that. They can continue to call these exercises with the other NATO allies, the ones that are currently members of NATO, and they can just sort of keep them there together going through these exercises.
Mm-hmm. All right. So
it does, though, Vince, as you well know, what it does do every time that we continue to have more people in the area, the likelihood that something bad happens increases dramatically.
In other words, you are concerned that Biden just brought us a step closer to World War III.
I am concerned with every action that he has taken to either send additional weapons, money, or troops into that area, that it takes us a step closer to a major global conflict. And I do not like it one bit.
So you're in Congress. When you talk to people about Ukraine, what do they say the end state is? What's the end goal? Does anyone ever talk about what, like this? We know we have succeeded, and we can say stop committing new resources there because it's over. When is that point?
In Washington, you won't get that time frame. They say whatever it takes. That's
For
the
what,
three
though?
words. That whatever it takes, Vince, and they don't, because we don't have a plan, we don't have a mission statement, we don't have the definition of whatever. Okay, it takes. But I will tell you this: when I go around Montana and I talk to the people across the state, they say whatever it takes as well to bring them home. Whatever it takes to get our soldiers home, whatever it takes to keep us from sending billions of dollars to Ukraine without a good goal, without a definition of with what we were supposed to be doing. And then to add insult to injury, one of the additional amendments that we tried passing was to keep the United States from taking their old, outdated cluster bombs and sending them to Ukraine. I started asking questions today. Why is it that we could not get the amendment passed to keep from sending these cluster bombs when it's my understanding that all they're doing, the military is doing, is trying to find some place to dispose of them. And the fields, the wheat fields of Ukraine is the best location we have found. Vince, it's insane. What is going on over there is insane. I'm pleased with the NDAA. I really am. We just were successful at deconstructing the largest social experiment of the left. It's called the U.S. military. We have language in there so that they are not going to be able to fund abortions through the military on taxpayers' dollars. We have language in there to make sure that they're not going to fund transgender surgeries.
Let me pause.
Treatment.
I agree. I'm happy with this outcome. I want to start with the abortion issue, though, so people understand.
Okay.
The Biden administration has begun paying for abortion-related expenses to kill more babies using American taxpayer dollars in the United States military. And so you've had Senator Tommy Tuberville over in the Senate blocking military nominations and saying, you will stop this barbaric practice and then I will allow more nominations to go through. That's been the Senate position. Over in the House, as you are authorizing all of this spending for the military, you have successfully just passed a huge package today for the Pentagon, but said you will no longer spend money supporting the death of these children. You will not do that anymore. Was that a difficult task? I'm very glad to see Republicans can get together at least on that.
They got together and were very united on that. I was thrilled. Look, I have gone over to the Senate chambers and stood behind the rail to support Senator Tuberville. Yep. And many of my colleagues have gone over there with me because he doesn't have a lot of Senate Republicans standing there behind him, I will tell you. But there's House members that believe how critically important what he's doing is. And so to see this amendment placed on the National Defense Act, again, is really, really – it gives you some hope, Vance. I'll tell you, when you're in here every day struggling through this stuff, to see the Republicans came together and said, you know something, we put life first. And I'm telling you, the left has been using the military as a social experiment, and we did. We pulled the funding out for that.
And you've also pulled the funding for, at least for now, in the House version, which just passed today, thank goodness. You also pulled the funding for cosmetic genital surgeries, castrations, hormone treatments, unnecessary hormone treatments. This is all of this funding stripped out, and why is the Biden administration fighting you on this?
They like to have the social experiment, I guess. We pulled all that out. We pulled out the funding for diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI programs. I'm telling you, we have removed the money that's going to be spent on the National Defense Act now is actually going to be utilized to make sure that we have the most lethal, effective fighting force on earth. And that's what I want.
Yes. And when you say lethal, you mean for America's enemies, not America's children. That's the that's what it should be dedicated to. So what's going to happen in the Senate? All the media coverage I'm seeing today is making it seem like this is just crazy. This is a far right NDAA. What's going to happen in the Senate?
It'll be interesting to see. We know that the Republicans are in the minority. We know that even with the members that they have, we still could use some stiffening up, if you will, over on the Senate side. And everybody's continuing to look at ways that we can improve that situation.
And here's Tommy Tuberville fighting the good fight over there, stopping all of these nominations until the killing ends. What is, I saw Biden earlier.
Vince, that's why it's so important that when someone like Tommy Tuberville stands up and says that I am not going to allow this, that we go over and give him support.
Yeah, amen. And do you think Republicans are supporting him, or are they being squeamish?
I think you've got a lot of squeamish actors over there.
Yeah, like they're keeping their distance. And why? In other words, like, why am I just seeing his name in the news so much and not every other Republican senator?
Exactly. That's my point. That is exactly my point. That's why we get together and we go over there and let Senator Tuberville know that he is not alone.
Do you think McConnell supports Tuberville?
I haven't seen him come
the answer is no. You can say it.
Huh?
There's no way he does. Otherwise, he would have said it. He would be in front of a microphone right now saying it. He doesn't. He wants to get this over with.
Now, Vince.
What, you're not in the Senate? Who cares? You're not this is not McCarthy. This is McConnell. Go ahead, smack him around a little bit. Come on, Congressman. Oh, okay. All right. Fine. Maybe I can sense in you desire to one day be in the Senate. Congressman, you crack me up. All right. So finally, on this issue, do you think you prevail over Joe Biden here? Because Biden said this week that he's not even interested in getting on the phone with Tommy Tuberville. They want to, remember, he's a great Catholic. He's pushing abortion hard. How do you think this ends?
Yeah. Look, he changes his story every day. It depends on what his prompters or puppeteers are telling him. It just depends on what they need to accomplish on that given day. President Biden has already shown that just because he makes a statement and says, I'm not doing, this or that, it just depends on where the negotiation and where the transaction, if you will, goes on the following day and what they're trying to accomplish. And they're going to count votes over there. And guess what? What they're also watching is how are the districts looking that these people are running for reelection. Look, there's at least 3 extremely vulnerable senators over there that are up for reelection. Happens to be one from the state of Montana.
It happens to be.
Tester.
Yes,
happens
that's true.
Happens to be number 2 is Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Number 3 is Sherrod Brown. Everybody knows that, and so they're over there. They're counting noses for every single vote. It's very unfortunate that people look at their next election instead of the next generation before they cast their vote.
Okay, then, Congressman, just because you brought it up, it made me think of it, so I have to ask, are you any closer to making a decision about a Senate run?
Look, I've been very clear, okay? John Tester does not represent the people of Montana, and he will be replaced. And the people of Montana, not the D.C. cartel, are going to make the decision about who's going to be the next senator. And there's a lot of polling out there that says there's a lot of folks, an overwhelming majority of them, that would like to see me in the upper chamber. So we'll see how the next few months plays out.
Yeah, and the way time works, like regardless, you are closer to making a decision. That's how this works. Yeah, with each passing day.
The election day comes closer, so you have to get closer to making a decision.
That's exactly right. All right, Congressman Rosendale, thank you for that perspective as always, sir. Good to talk to you today. Have a great weekend.
Always good to speak with you. Thank you for the time, Vince.
Yes, sir.
God
3:50 now. God bless you. Coming up, I've got more audio for you. Asa Hutchinson, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley waiting in the wings to walk into the buzzsaw that is Tucker Carlson today in Des Moines, Iowa. We'll see what happens there. But first, some breaking news for you, just out in the last half hour. An appeals court today has agreed, according to the Washington Examiner, the 5th U.S. Court of Appeals, the 5th Circuit, has agreed to halt an injunction that has been blocking dozens of Biden administration officials and federal agencies from contacting social media companies. This is that case out of Missouri versus the Biden administration, where Judge Doty, you remember his stern decision saying that the Biden administration seems to be running afoul of the First Amendment in some of the most egregious violations, if not the most egregious violations in American history, using social media companies to censor Americans, to hurt their ability to communicate. And he had issued an injunction, one that the Biden administration has been trying to appeal. They had lost in previous court decisions, but here in the U.S. Court of Appeals, they just got a victory. The Biden administration, that is. This is a victory for tyranny in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. They had just issued a stay on that lower court order that barred those numerous officials from flagging so-called misinformation found on social media websites. The decision also expedited oral arguments over the matter, meaning it'll happen more quickly. And a panel of judges will be assigned later to decide whether to grant a more long-term stay at the Justice Department's request. This action stems from that 4th of July decision, that is Independence Day, by U.S. District Judge Terry Doty that prevented agencies, including the following: the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Justice Department, the FBI, and more, from, quote, urging, encouraging, pressuring, or inducing social media companies to remove or restrict content covered by the First Amendment and its free speech protections. So this is this battle's only going to continue. It was very encouraging to see Judge Doty's injunction, and you really hope that in the end, his wisdom, which is so well spelled out in his July 4th ruling, prevails. You really hope it does. You have to say a prayer that it does, and you have to keep fighting to get good people in position to appoint good judges to honor and respect the Constitution, because the left is in a full-out assault against it right now, aren't they? A full-out assault against it, and they're doing it in cahoots with corporate America. Look no further than the fundraising haul we just heard that Joe Biden fetched today. They're reporting their second quarter numbers right now, and Joe Biden's campaign and the DNC and his joint fundraising campaign committee, they just raised $72 million in the second quarter. By way of comparison, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis raised $55 million combined. How did that happen? It's because the richest and most powerful interests in this country have a perfectly good idiot in place who is doing their bidding. That is Joe Biden. And so we have a lot of tyranny to stand up to coming at us from all fronts. But that's the update on that important free speech fight playing out in the courts. For the moment, the Biden administration getting a victory. Let's hope they get brushed back. Coming up, I've got more candidate audio out of Iowa, the 2024 election, very much underway.